We have Kelsey here with us today to share her family's journey with CDH. Kelsey, can you introduce yourself and tell everyone a little bit about you and your family, where you live, and what life was like pre-CDH, and then what happened when you first heard those words, congenital diaphragmatic hernia?
Um, so, um, I'm sorry, my dog's kind of barking over there.
That's okay.
uh, so, um, my name's Kelsey Yetmer. My son Thomas James was diagnosed with CDH at 20 weeks at his anatomy scan, but prior to that, we had uh, two other healthy, happy children, and um, didn't have any worries about pregnancy or any diagnoses, followed the rules of like taking, prenatal vitamins and, um, you know, we were excited and planning this pregnancy and had all kinds of hopes for how things would go. And we had never heard about CDH. We've heard about like the common ones, like anencephaly or spina bifida or those kinds of things, but never CDH at all. So it was just, we thought, third time around for anatomy scan, we'd be in and out of there pretty quick. And we're looking forward to finding out the gender of our child, and didn't really take it as like a medical, test, more so just like exciting getting to see your baby and getting to see the gender. Um, and then it was at that point when they were taking longer than usual, and you kind of know as a mom that something's going on. And she kept going back, the ultrasound tech kept going back to like the heart and chest area, but she wouldn't tell us why. um, but she said she could see the heart. And then they had us leave for a little bit and come back and meet with the doctor. And the doctor walked in and he said, um, we think it's CDH, congenital diaphragmatic hernia, which I thought hernia, that it wasn't something major, that I thought it was something that could be like easily fixed after he was born. And then the doctor started drawing diagrams immediately of like where organs are and like explaining everything, but didn't really go into the severity of the diagnosis, just because he was just a general OBGYN and says he doesn't really see a lot of those cases. Um, so he wasn't able to really give us much information. He just said what it meant was that the baby would probably need additional breathing assistance when he was born. So it seemed kind of minimal compared to how severe it really was. Um, a week later, we had to wait about a week to get into the perinatal specialist in Des Moines. Um, and at that point, like I had already looked up CDH, even though they're like, don't look it up, don't, you kind of have to. Um, so then it was like hearing from other parents who have been through it. And a lot of them were like, we had the exact same experience. Like, here's some questions to ask, which was helpful because it's like, you don't even know where to start. Um, and then we go into the like level 2 or like the specialized ultrasound. And it was like a 45-minute ultrasound. And then the ultrasound tech left and the perinatal specialist came back in, and he spent about 5 minutes with us and like gave us a very like quick rundown. He's like, yep, it's CDH. I don't see any other anomalies, but you have two options. Um, One is to terminate, and two is to go somewhere with ECMO capabilities for babies. And he's like, but at that point, you're just kind of buying time. Um, and I asked him about how many diagnoses he sees. Um, to get a better idea of how familiar he was with the condition. And he said he only sees maybe one, maybe two a year. And he's a specialist for like, you know, like above just a regular OBGYN. So you would think he would see those more often. So then he just kind of walked out of the room when I said I wasn't interested in termination and would like a referral to the level 4 NICU hospital in Iowa. That following Friday, we had like a whole meeting with like, was it like fetal, like the pediatric cardiology, the maternal fetal medicine there, the OBGYN, pediatric surgeons, the NICU team. So it was really overwhelming because we had to be down there at like 8 in the morning, and it's like a 3-hour drive from where we live. And we go in there and they do like it's another ultrasound, and they don't really say anything to you. And you keep seeing them trying to figure out what direction things are because they can't figure out like the heart and the lungs and why everything's kind of where it shouldn't be. And then like the doctor and a bunch of residents come in, and it's overwhelming. And they tell you how bad it is. And they don't have any advice about like other options. It's just how bad it is. And they don't give you it, like, they didn't tell us any odds or anything. It was just, it's really bad. Probably like one of the more severe cases we've seen. And there's not really anything we can do at this point. At that point, I had heard from another person about the fetal procedure at Mayo that Mayo was doing in Rochester, and wanted to get like a second opinion or see if we could potentially participate in that clinical study. So they were able to refer us down there. And again, like at Iowa City, they suggested termination, but they didn't push it like the prior doctor did. They also offered a third option of like comfort care, palliative care, like perinatal hospice. So they were a lot more understanding of like the value of a life kind of thing. And it didn't seem like we were like wasting their time. We had to go through like 3 more doctor appointments after getting that terrible news, and just sit there and have to sit through more appointments and see more doctors. It was just a really long day. And then we went to Mayo Clinic. The following 2 weeks, I had to fight with insurance to get insurance to cover our visit, because they said just for testing down there, we'd have to put a $5,000 deposit to be able to go down there. And when I had talked to the clinical like nurse or director of that study, she said that they would want to see us by 24 weeks. And we were down to like the wire on time frames, because we didn't get the diagnosis until 20 weeks. And we didn't go to like the maternal fetal medicine doctor in Des Moines until like 21 weeks. And we were at 21 and 6 by the end of that when we went to Iowa, which they reminded us that was the latest you could terminate to. So they kept bringing that up. So then we had to come back that next Friday for an amniocentesis, because that was a requirement for the fetal study. And so we finally got insurance to approve everything. It took like a week, and they said we could expect to wait up to like 4 weeks or more. But they did approve it, so we were able to like make it down there like the day before we found out like they had approved it. Otherwise we were just not going to be able to participate at all. So we went down there like that following Monday, and we had 2 full days of testing. We had like a fetal MRI, and that ended up being like 2.5 hours. And then we met with each individual department down there that would be involved, and had to be cleared by like to make sure there's no other anomalies. And it was at that very end of the day when they were going to go ahead and schedule the surgery for the following day, that they found a microdeletion on the amniocentesis, an 8p23.1 microdeletion, which ruled us out of the study because that's like a confounding variable, and could have additional symptoms or side effects that they can't see on an ultrasound. So at that point, we returned to the hospital in Iowa for continued care for the rest of the pregnancy. It was hard because we had to go to ultrasounds, and it's a long day because you start, it's a 3-hour drive there, and then you have 3 or 4 appointments throughout the day, and then you have another 3-hour drive back, and it's just like continued bad news every appointment. And then you'd have a different doctor every time, and it would be hard because you had to feel like you kept retelling, what you've been through over and over. And some doctors were excellent doctors and took time to talk with you, and other ones just kind of acted like it was a lost cause. It was hard with COVID going on because you had to sit with a mask on the entire time, and crying with the mask on is so uncomfortable. And then you can't breathe, you're extremely pregnant and you have a mask on and you're crying and you already feel like everyone's staring at you. And you see these other women around you happy and everything else while you're waiting in the waiting areas. You try not to cry. And then we had our care conference at 32 weeks. And there was only 2 of the same doctors we had ever met in there. And they walked us through the different options that we had. And they agreed that Thomas had less than a 5% chance of survival. And they talked about, how much intervention he would need and the quality of life he could potentially have after, and that they didn't believe you would be a good candidate for ECMO because you have to be able to come off of ECMO to be put on ECMO, was their belief. And so it felt like we didn't even have an option if we could get him to stabilize somewhat to be able to be intubated. And so we were left with the option of comfort care at that point, which part of it feels like you're choosing to do nothing. But the nurses there were really caring on the labor and delivery floor. We had to have like COVID testing before we went in for our induction, and we couldn't have any additional family members there. It was just myself and my husband. And we knew that Thomas wouldn't live very long, and we couldn't have other people in our family there to meet him or see him.
So sorry, Kelsey. I'm so sorry.
And it's just like with the COVID, like they're like, oh, if it wasn't COVID, you could have had your other children there or your family members. And then when we had gone in for the induction, and they want you to tell them like if what you're understanding is gonna happen. And it was so hard to explain to them like, well, yeah, we're electing for comfort care because we understand the interventions are very aggressive once a baby's born, that you can't just kind of wait and see. And that they understood that we knew that he would pass away, and having to say it out loud was so hard. And then he was born on the middle of a shift change at like 6:30 at night. And like, so a doctor came in that I'd never met, came in and delivered him. And she couldn't even get like her gloves on because like at that point I had told him I needed to push that he would be born like shortly. And she like handed him to me, and then it was like they were just standing there staring, like waiting for him to pass away. And then just seeing him struggle was so hard because part of me wanted to do something. I knew that they wouldn't be able to do anything. And they had said that most likely if they had tried to intubate him or do anything, that he would pass away before we would ever be able to hold him. So having to make that decision of trying to think about how much to get involved and how much to just kind of let things happen was so hard to make that decision. And we had thought about wanting to go somewhere else to another hospital, but we just couldn't swing it with 2 other kids and our jobs. And then when we had gotten the diagnosis, like the other like second opinion from Mayo, and they had told us how bad it was, that it really was like extremely severe, that it wasn't a mild case, and they knew more about it and seemed more knowledgeable about it. And then with the AP23.1 microdeletion, that they said there could be heart things they couldn't see on the screen too, that it made it a little bit easier to kind of understand what his prognosis would be. But then we still had doctors telling us like weeks before he was born, well, we really can't assess lung volume because until they're born, we don't really know. So it was like conflicting advice from every doctor, which didn't make making like decisions any easier.
That's just, all of that's awful. The fact that you didn't have consistent doctors, the fact that you didn't have consistent answers, and COVID, and I'm so sorry, Kelsey. That's just hell. There's just no other word for it. I'm so sorry. I can't imagine being in your shoes. I'm a grieving CDH mom too, but I can't imagine going through what you've gone through. But you said you felt like you were doing nothing, but you were absolutely not doing nothing. You were absolutely doing the best thing you could for him by getting another opinion and trying to figure out your options, and then making the decision to have time to be with his parents, which you wouldn't have had if you had, decided to intercede, given the odds that he had. If you did everything right in the worst possible case scenario, and that's nothing any parent should ever go through. I'm so sorry.
And the good thing was that there were other parents that reached out through CDHI and like explained like what helped them make decisions for care. and why they kind of went that route. And it was all different walks of life that people like kind of explain their case and their scenario. And like one person, like specifically, she reached out to me and she had a similar case, and she elected for comfort care, and she walked me down kind of what that looks like and how to prepare, and like helpful tips, the kind of stuff that you don't find in like children's books, like making sure you make funeral arrangements, making sure that you kind of have stuff to make memories while you're in the hospital, and just ways to celebrate their life after they pass. So it was hope in a different aspect. And then along the way, people gave us a lot of encouragement and support with people with both survivors and non-survivors. And that you knew they understood that it wasn't just like, I felt like a lot of people thought I was exaggerating how severe Thomas's diagnosis was, because they thought, oh, hernia, it can't be that bad. It's like maybe an inguinal hernia or a different kind of hernia. And they can fix it. They can fix almost everything, kind of attitude. And so when he passed away, it was just like people were like shocked that could happen, because they're like, oh, they say odds are like 80% of babies survive or something like that. And I'm like, but when babies survive, it's either a 0 or 100%. You either make it or you don't for that individual child.
Tell me about Thomas. Tell me what he was like when you were pregnant. Was he really active? And tell me what he looked like. CDH aside, tell me about him.
He was he wasn't as active as my other two boys, but he did have like a lot more hiccups, and he was a lot smaller than my other two kids, but he looked just like them. He had quite a bit of hair, and he had like a little nose just like my other boys, and he was pretty like long, and he looked perfect. I think that was the hard part, is he looked perfectly healthy on the outside. And he was so, like, he seemed healthy while I was pregnant with him. And that was, I think, what was hard for other people to understand too, was that, well, he can make it that far into pregnancy, and you know, he should be healthy because he's that old. How aren't his lungs developed? Kind of thing was kind of the attitude of like, well, they can save like premature babies, but why can't they save babies like full term that have lung issues? And then like when they saw him, people were like, he looks completely healthy. Like when we had his visitation, people were like, he looks, oh, like, you, what's wrong with him, kind of thing. So I think that made it harder for some people in our family to understand like how severe, and that it's internal, like that things aren't where they're supposed to be.
Every CDH family has that problem, whether the child survives or not. We also have to argue and defend the fact that they're beautiful on the outside, but they're not awful on the inside. That's the wrong term. Their bodies are really confused on the inside, and that's so hard for people to see and understand. And you know, it's a blessing, though. It really is, because you have that beautiful, beautiful, perfect little baby, CDH or not, for as long as you had him. And I'm so sorry you went through this. I'm so sorry you had to make these decisions. That's not something any parent should ever, ever have to make, but you absolutely did the best you could for him. And and through COVID and through everything else, and it's still so fresh for you. And I am just astounded by your strength and courage to share your story this early. Thank you. Really. Um, we have to tell their stories. You know, that's how they live on. We have to make something good come from the pain. And they weren't here for no reason. They were definitely here for a bigger purpose, whatever that is. And so how are your other boys handling this? How old are they?
My oldest is Jack. He's almost 6.5, and my next child, David, he is 3.5. Uh, Jack is a little bit more quiet. He really doesn't talk much about it, um, but he likes to look for ways to like remember Thomas, and he understands that not all babies go to the cemetery. And my younger child, that's all he knows because we don't have any close family members with younger babies. So he keeps asking, because I'm pregnant right now, he keeps asking if this baby is going to go to the cemetery too, which is hard, but I can understand where in his mind that's what he associates. um, he was so excited when he got to hold Thomas at the visitation, but he was so sad that Thomas had to be buried and couldn't understand why we left him there. And so we've been talking about that with them, and they did a good job with that at the hospital about giving us books and talking about, preparing kind of for the worst, how to talk with them about that. So it wasn't like we like hid that Thomas was sick or anything like that. We talked with them about it and didn't want to scare them that like it was something they could develop, or that everyone who's sick is going to die, or some kind of fear like that. But it has made it a little bit harder with this pregnancy because they ask if this baby is going to be sick like Thomas. And we're at the point where we don't really know yet. And you don't want to feel like you're lying, but you don't want to scare him either. So at this point, it's just like, as far as we know, this baby's healthy. Um, and we had genetic testing done. Um, and we didn't have any like genetic anomalies come up for us, even though Thomas had the micro deletion. They said it was like de novo, that it was completely um, just new with him, that we weren't carriers. We didn't have balanced translocations or anything that would cause this to occur again. Um, and the way they explained it to us is like the chances of this reoccurring again are extremely low, um, but not impossible. Uh, so it's kind of nerve wracking because we won't know until we go in on April 26th and have an ultrasound done, because I opted out of early ultrasounds just because ultrasounds give me so much anxiety that I just want to minimize the amount of ultrasounds, because it won't change my decision. The only thing it's going to change is what kind of care doctors that I'm going to look for, um, or additional testing. Um, so it's just kind of created a lot of uh, anxiety throughout our whole family, because it didn't just affect us, it affected a lot of other people. Um, and I had a lot of other friends who were pregnant at the same time, who were extremely worried they would have CDH, um, and a lot of questions about like, well, how do you get CDH, or those kind of questions. Um, some were kind of aimed at like, did you not take prenatals, or did you not go to the doctor, and like just kind of insensitive questions like that, and trying to explain there's nothing you can do to prevent it. It happens. It can happen to anyone. Um, Kind of statements and stuff.
People just don't know. We don't know. So those are
Right.
just normal questions that sting, but we have to do a better job at educating everybody.
And it surprises me like the amount of doctors that don't know about it either. Like when I brought my kids in for their pediatrician appointments, and I had explained that we had recently had our son pass away, their younger brother, and she wanted, like, she just had asked like how he had passed away, and I explained, and she had said she hadn't heard of that before, which was like surprising. Um, and I had like in my doctor's office when I went in there, my OBGYN doctor, they had a new nurse, and the doctor had explained to her that I needed to go to a specialist for this pregnancy, and because my child was born with CDH and passed away, and that I needed like to have some additional ultrasounds with this pregnancy. And she goes, "Oh, are you the person who had, like, the doctors didn't figure out your baby had that inguinal hernia until a couple days later?" And I was like, "No, that wasn't me. My child passed away." And it was like uncomfortable, like, statements that you think people like would see CDH more. Um, but it was hard when the one doctor had told me that with how severe a case that Thomas had, he said like 95% of parents choose to terminate at that point. And that you think about how many of them may have been able to survive if they had been given certain levels of care.
It's yeah, it's a lot about it because it's such a delicate topic. Because we really don't know how many babies we lose through termination because of the diagnosis and no information. And it's frustrating. We really have to do a better job educating the obstetricians and the pediatricians. We really, really do. Is there anything that you've already said quite a few things that should have been different as far as hospital care? Um, Personally, I would love to take this video and send it to that hospital and make them all sit down and watch and go, don't let this happen to any other parent, CDH or not. None of this is okay. Um, but is there something you can tell other parents who have been given a diagnosis that your family was given that someone said to you that helped, positive that you did that you want them to be able to do too?
Um, I think the biggest thing for us was um, having a lot of parents say, you know, the baby's safe and healthy right now. You can only take it day by day, and trying to enjoy, you know, what time you do have. I think that was the hardest part. And then just being reminded that there's nothing that like I did that could have prevented this, because you already feel so out of control of not being able to fix it, um, and also limiting how much time you spend researching, because I would spend hours a day like researching, you know, like um, lung volume, like all the different things to see if I could figure out some kind of prognosis, because there was so much conflicting um, information out there. But it really helped to have other parents to talk um, to be able to know like what to expect when you have like those patient care conferences, um, and then like how to work with insurance. Like a lot of people have a lot of different backgrounds, so they were able to give a lot of insight that you wouldn't get from just talking to, you know, someone face to face. But I think the biggest thing was just being able to talk to another parent who said, like, that sounds exactly like what I went through. Not feeling so alone. Because when you're going through it, you feel like everyone else just goes on with their day and that you're just kind of by yourself. And when you find out that diagnosis at 20 weeks and you know you have another 20 weeks left to go in a pregnancy, it's a long time. And you think, you know, is something going to happen today? Is something going to happen tomorrow? And just to think, you just have to enjoy each day, you know, because you don't really know what could happen and you can't control what will happen.
Thank you, Kelsey, so much for sharing your story with us. And I know it wasn't easy, and we really appreciate it, because I hope that anyone else who is in the same position that your family happens to be in will be able to look at this video and know that they're not alone.